Again, my name is Dave Pearson. I'm with the National Weather Service. I'm the service hydrologist there. Have I talked to any of you on the phone before in the past, maybe? Raise your hands, a few of you. So, that's kind of why we're here tonight. And maybe one of the main reasons is to meet people, to give you the means to get information. One thing we heard of in the last flood is while we talked to a lot of people, there were people that didn't get information ahead of time that we feel would have been useful. We don't have all the answers usually, but at least we have information that we hope can help. So tonight we're going to give the latest conditions and talk about what could be to come. Thank you for coming. The handouts, I didn't make enough copies. I apologize for that. I made a lot, but so this presentation will be posted to our website. We're recording the audio and the video, so if you want to watch it later, you want to send it to your neighbors, you can do that. The handout material is also going to be on our website, so you can find that there if you didn't get a printout in the back. I want to throw this out there too. If you're someone who lives along the river, we're always looking for people, especially on the river, to give us ice information, specifically ice jams. If that's something you would like to do, see me after the meeting. We have a sign-up sheet. We'll get your information, and we may contact you in the future. So, our goal for the meeting is two main things. We're going to give the latest information that we have, and it's a bit early in some respects. It's February 4th. There's a lot of winter left, but we do have information that is useful. But then also, just to make sure you know where to go to get information moving forward. This talk tonight is a snapshot of right now, okay? It's going to change 2 weeks from now because we're going to get different weather. And then by March, or when we ever do have more snow that melts or more rains that come, there'll be updates by then as well too. It really is not meant to be a final answer to the question of, is it going to flood this spring? Because we don't know everything yet. There's things that haven't happened yet, and I'll show last year as an example of that. We want to find a way to make sure you know where to get information. I can't emphasize that enough. We're putting out information via our website, but also social media, Twitter, Facebook. People call us all the time. We're a public servant to you all. We're taxpayer funded. We serve the public. That's what we do. I want to throw this out there now. Now's the time to figure out how to get information. It's not during a flood. It's not even the day before. There are things out there. I don't know every county and what they offer. I do know that Dodge County offers emergency alerts, and that's something you can find on their website. I'm sure there's information in the back on how to achieve that information. You will get notifications via email or a text message if that's something you want to get. I want to do just a brief review of the flood. We could talk for a whole hour about the flood and things that happened. There's not a whole lot left to say. I've been to many meetings and after action things and talked about lessons learned, things we could have done better, things that we did okay on. But there's a few things to point out in how last year looked, especially in this year's context. This is a map. Can you see this okay? This is a map of the snow depth 1 year ago today. The most glaring thing you would see on this map is that there is no snow in Nebraska virtually. The entire state of Nebraska has almost no snow. That was 1 year ago today, okay? A lot of snow up in the Dakotas, okay? If we went forward 1 month from this image, this is March 4th of 2019. A pretty dramatic change in just 1 month. So I bring that up to say where we are now and where we're going to be a month from now, we all know it can change dramatically. So this is just a first look at the situation. A few river graphs to show the job that we do, the information that we have, things like this we take for granted. This is a river level graph on the Platte River at North Bend. The USGS monitors the rivers across Nebraska and across the country, actually. So at North Bend, I don't have to tell you kind of how things happen, but The graph, shot up quite a bit on the 13th and 14th. Technically not a record level, but it got pretty close to record levels at North Bend. Maple Creek near Nickerson, very high, reached that major flood stage. Talked about getting information. Part of the information is river level information. That's all on our website. And then the Elkhorn River at West Point. There is a gauge at Winslow, but the data didn't come in during the flood, so I couldn't show that. So it's not just weather, it's also river information. It's, I look at it every day because it's part of my job, but I mean, people on the river, who checks the river levels every day for a river near them? Raise your hand. I mean, if it becomes kind of a common practice, then you're not as surprised when things may change. This image might be kind of hard to see, but this is kind of one of the final review images. So what we did here is we took information that led to the flood. We took the amount of liquid water in the snowpack. So when you have snow on the ground, there's liquid in that snow, obviously. We added to that the amount of rain that fell, because we got rain, as you all recall. And when you add that all together, you end up with a tremendous amount of liquid plus snow melt that occurred in the area. All of these purple squares represent a location that had a record river level. So pretty tremendous, and it lines up almost perfectly with the highest amounts. So some of the areas had anywhere from 4 to 5 inches of liquid equivalent precipitation plus snow melt. It's one more way to say it was a really bad situation. I don't want to dwell too much more on March, and I'm not writing it off like it's not important, because it is. But one factor alone wouldn't have been enough to create that flood. You really needed multiple things occurring all at once. We needed a deep snow cover, which we had. We needed frozen ground, which we had in March, which is pretty uncommon. Heavy rain. Heavy rain in March isn't uncommon, but when you put it on frozen ground, that isn't uncommon. And then that river ice was tremendous. That's a big difference between this year and last year. Kind of pivoting now from 2019 into 2020, and as I talk about the flood risk, if you think of questions you have at the end of the talk, we will have an opportunity to ask questions. I have some people that can bring some mics around if you have a question to ask, and I'll be here until the last person leaves to answer questions too, so don't feel like you have to ask in front of the entire group if you don't want to. We look at several things, and this is part of the routine every year. I do this every year, even in the boring years when nothing happens. Even in the years when there's no snow and it's warm. I think of the winter of 2012. I have pictures of the Elkhorn, in the middle of February with no ice. There's years where nothing happens at all, but we go through this every year in our office. We have a checklist of things that could lead to flooding, and we check the boxes. We start with Snowpack. We lost all of our snow over the weekend, right? I mean, there's some patches here and there, but we're putting that risk in the below normal category. I gotta put an asterisk by it though, because we can still get more snow, right? And we probably will. We have over a month of winter left to go. When it comes to soil moisture though, that is a problem this year. The soil moisture is above normal for a lot of Nebraska, not the entire state. When you get further north, it's even worse in the Dakotas, but you can't find a lot of people that want more water in the soil right now. There's enough. That's a problem because if you get rain, obviously, it can't really soak in as easily, and it can lead to easier flooding. Frozen ground, I'm going to put that in the below normal risk. That's a good thing. The ground probably is still frozen in some places. It's been warm, but we've lost some of that frozen ground. That's a good thing. But at the same time, I got to put an asterisk by it because it's only February 4th, and I'll show you later how we're probably going to get cold again. I think last year this time we were somewhere around 15 to 18 inches of frost depth. That's in Valley at our office. And it was probably worse in other places, so we're not even anywhere near last year. The next category is the amount of water in the river. This is something that gets measured by the USGS. They monitor the amount of water is important. That's above normal. if you've seen the Platte River in the last several months, the Elkhorn River, they're all running high, right? I mean, that's obvious. That's not really something you need to commission a study for. It's pretty obvious. The problem with that is it's that much easier to flood. So if your river is already high, if you get heavy rain at any point, it's that much easier, especially in the areas that along the river, especially in the areas where we still have maybe some levee issues with levees that are still unrepaired from last March. So Mount Alarm River above normal risk. Precipitation outlook, that's the trickiest one. I'm calling it normal for now, but we'll talk about it again, how that can obviously change. Ice jam risk, below normal. I don't mean to say that that's not an issue, because even tonight, we have an ice jam near Scribner, right? You probably have heard that. Just upstream of Scribner. We got an alert from the office that there's one up by Tilden too, that's way far north. And then on the Platte River we have near Sokol Camp, which is kind of that's by Maple Street, is that right? So we have ice on the rivers. Some river sections have no ice, right? And in those areas it seems like nothing's gonna happen. But what ice is there is collecting. Talking to Rich a little bit before, some of the ice is anywhere from 6 to 8 inches thick even, which is kind of shocking. It seems like we had a mild winter, but the ice jam threat, I'm calling it on the below normal side because the ice isn't like last year where it was like 2 feet thick by this point. And we're gonna have some warm days coming up, which should help that situation out before it gets too worse. So looking at some of these things a little more in depth, okay? This is the winter precipitation so far. If you're a meteorologist, winter starts December 1st. That's just what we do. It's just easier. Meteorological winter, as it were. The blue colors mean more precipitation than normal, so not too hard to notice. Much of the state is actually in the above normal category, right? Interestingly enough, you got places in southwest Nebraska that are concerned about drought and wildfire risk. Not so much here. We don't have that risk, but so there's a lot of moisture that's fallen this winter. Not extreme, but it's certainly above normal. We can't not talk about the mountain snowpack because that does feed into the Platte River. Not the Elkhorn, but the Platte River does have its source in the mountains, of course. So this is the state of Wyoming. I blocked out the places we don't care about because Wyoming drains all over, right? All we care about is the snow that melts in the Platte River. The takeaway here, and this was made today, maybe you saw in the news, I'll show Colorado too, but they just got dumped on with snow in the mountains again. That's what they do in the winter, but they got a pretty healthy amount of snow. In general, that snow is near to above normal in the mountains. That doesn't really get me concerned yet. It's still early. These numbers are kind of all over. And we have time for that to change one way or the other, but we're already tracking on the above average side. When we look at Colorado, the headwaters are near Denver and we're somewhere near average there as well. If all of these shapes, and I go back one, were this blue category, then you start getting a little more concerned, but we have a lot of time for there to be snow or for there not to be snow. So right now that's kind of on average and that's okay, we can deal with that. This, and I'm not trying to draw a parallel to last year, but this is the current snow depth out there, right? There's almost no snow to be had in Nebraska. There's quite a bit of snow in the Dakotas yet, and even further north, we don't care about that for the most part. It does matter if you're on the Missouri River. I'm not trying to not talk about that, but for the most part, I'm staying away from that subject. So not a whole lot of snow, that's a good thing. That's why that risk is below normal, so we like that. And this looks to be the case for at least a few weeks yet, where we're not going to have a whole lot of snow to worry about. Again, last year it was snow, right? It wasn't just snow, it was snow and rain. It wasn't just snow and rain, it was snow and rain and frozen ground. So it was several things all together. I talked about soil moisture. I tried to put a yellow star kind of where we are on this map. It's kind of a weird view, but green means on the high side of normal, and then the darker greens mean well above normal. My family's all up in South Dakota. They're pretty concerned about the soil moisture. And the flooding concerns up there are even higher than here, but we are above normal, so we really can't take a lot of rain. So if we get into a wet pattern of rain, if we get into a situation where it's going to be active weather and rain concerns, that will be something to be aware of. This is not going to get better, by the way. You don't lose soil moisture in February. You can make it worse, and then you lose it via evaporation and crop use and things like that throughout the summer. So we're stuck with that. That's not going away. Neither is this. We have rivers that are high. So a lot of lines, triangles. The key thing is that the triangles are where we're supposed to be. The blue line is where we are. So the rivers are running very high. And they're not just running high, they're running way high. We're talking like 200, 300% above normal. And it's hard to lose the amount of water in the river during the wintertime. Again, that kind of stuff goes away over time. It takes time for rivers to lose their water. Irrigation helps, things like that, so we're stuck with that. Same on the Elkhorn River, tremendously high. So just a lot of water to worry about. And again, the risk there is that your river's already running high, so if you add a lot of water to the system in terms of runoff and rain, it's that much easier to get to flooding. River ice has been interesting this year. We had kind of a cold November, if you remember. Then it got mild again, and then we got cold again. Kind of a typical Nebraska thing. So we do have currently an ice jam near Scribner. The latest information is that it's mainly affecting only lowland areas. It's not meant to be discarded as a non-issue because it is a concern to have an ice jam. And as that ice piles up slowly, it can continue to back up and impact something more important than just a lowland area. So we're watching that closely. What we do is we monitor this along with emergency management and people in this crowd who have sent us information, like Becky from Scribner. So information is important. We get a lot of stuff on Twitter. We get pictures, things like that. So we're always looking for more information, but I'm mildly optimistic about the ice this year because we're way different than this time last year where we had a lot of ice. We're running low on days to make ice. It's just you don't have any more cold days coming up. So kind of what ice we have is what we're going to have to deal with. We'll probably will make more at some point, but it's nothing like this time last year. Okay, now kind of getting into weather, and this is kind of where it gets a little more interesting. Well, it was already interesting, right? Even more interesting than what's already been discussed is the upcoming temperature trends. We had a great weekend last weekend, right? Very warm. I thought about going golfing, but there was still snow in the course. This coming weekend, we kind of get into that warming trend again. So maybe reaching as high as 46, 41 Saturday and Sunday. But still freezing overnight, so we're going to make ice. So we're not done with ice yet. That's kind of the short-term concern then is, we're going to have these cold nights, and then we get even colder. I'll talk about that in a bit. Toward Valentine's Day, we get even colder. But this ice jam near Scribner, there's one up by Tilden, and that ice moves. So we need to maybe we can get some of that worked out in the next few days. If not, then we may freeze things in place, and that won't be a concern. So warming trend into the weekend, getting in towards Valentine's Day, we see a change in the weather pattern. I'll show that here more in a bit. We have so much information to show, it's hard to distill it down into a few things, but this is temperature, okay? And it's looking at temperature relative to normal. So the greens and the blues mean below normal, cold, and the reds and the oranges mean warmer. This is looking at February 14th. So we go from a warmish kind of weekend, and it appears that after that we dip back into some cold air. And that's not what we want, because we want to stay warm. We want to melt all of the ice, but it looks like we're going to hang on to the cold air for the end of February. So this is February 14th, and then it just kind of gets colder after that. Now this is looking pretty far out, so we're looking 2 weeks in the future. It gets pretty tricky with weather that far out. You can't necessarily say it's going to be 10 degrees outside, but you can look at trends at least, and these trends have been holding steady the past few days. I did update these this morning, but they didn't change much from when I made them yesterday. So that cold air advances, I'll go back one. So that cold air advances, we're the yellow star, okay? Lingers into the end of February. So it's kind of like, February's gonna have two stories to it, kind of a mild first half, and then in the second half we get back into the real cold air, making ice, and it's a little concerning to have this kind of a signal, because that means that you can't just say it's all over for the end of February. So we're watching that closely. And this is really getting out there. The first look at March is a look pretty far out. This will change, but at least right now, the cold air lingers. I don't mean cold air like, this is really talking about below normal. So I know it's cold in February every year, but for the end of the month and into early March, that cold signal lingers. All the warm air is well further south, above normal warmth, not just warmth. It's always warm down there. So that's not especially encouraging, I'm not gonna lie. I don't like that. I'd rather this look like flipped, but it is what it is. In the days leading up to March last year, a lot of this information was kind of holding pretty true, but this is pretty far out, so I don't want you to think that this March 14th image is going to exactly happen that way, but at least for now, there's a trend there that we're watching. Precipitation. The good news on this is that in the next several days, not a whole lot's going to happen here. Maybe some light snow here and there, but for the most part, it's the mountains. They're going to get a lot of snow. That's what they do. And then there's a lot of moisture well away from us. So not a whole lot happening. This is the next 7 days, added up all together. And it's essentially nothing for us, so that's good. But going a little further out, the main storm track remains in the southeast part of the United States. That's good. But also, here's how I look at these images too. This is February 18th, pretty far out in the future. How I look at these images too is it's also we don't have these dry colors over us, so this is saying that the west coast is going to be dry. Over us, we're somewhere kind of on the edge of being in the track for more weather or not. And as that cold air comes in around Valentine's Day, we do see a shift into getting more active weather. The heaviest at this point appears to be focused to our southeast, like well to our southeast, but we're on the edge of that. So it appears by the middle of February, we get back in the cold air, we get back into getting more moisture too. And this just kind of summarizes that as well. This is an image looking, combining February and March together. We're kind of in between the two worlds of being kind of near normal and wet. But as the previous image showed, it does look like middle of the month we get into the cold air again and into some more snow. So what? What does it mean? We're going to have this same talk along the Missouri River, and those areas are even more vulnerable than where we are today, but there's no getting around it that there is an above normal risk for flooding this spring. People have been telling me, what should I do? That's a tough thing to answer, but vigilance is one thing, knowing the conditions is one thing. Being near a river, being vulnerable, having things near the river, I don't know what it takes to move, simple things, but if you can move simple things away from the river, why not? Because the river's already running high, it's not going to take much at all for it to come out of its banks if we get into a more wet pattern like the end of February looks like. And then March is really getting into the really more trickier part, and if we stay active then too, March could be also something to consider, but I can't look at all that and say there isn't an above normal risk, because there is. Comparing March of last year to March to this year, the big difference is the river ice, in my view. I remember driving to Columbus. I know Columbus is the Loop River, I get it, but when I went to Columbus this time last year, they had so much ice in the river, I couldn't believe it. I almost drove off the road and I saw it. It was 20 feet deep in some places. I mean, it was drifted in and snow too, but it looked dramatically different. So that's the one thing going for us, is that we've lost our ice this past weekend. We've lost our snowpack this past weekend, that's good. And we have a couple weeks of, it looks like, quiet weather at least. And we'll see how the second half of February turns out, if we're going to get more. It looks like we're going to get into a more active weather pattern to end the month. Every year, what ends up being the biggest determining factor is where and how heavy any kind of rains end up falling. If we hadn't had frozen ground last March, it would have been way different. And we've lost almost all of our frost this year so far. A lot of that water is soaking into the ground. It's not completely gone. So hitting the reset button on frost depth is good. It's not as tremendous as it was last year, where there was over 1.5 feet of frozen ground to get rid of. Hitting the reset button on the snow is good. The things we can't change are the soil moisture again and the amount of water in the river. So it's kind of a mixed bag of risk, but in the end, I'm still looking at an above normal risk. It's important to know, though, like I said at the beginning, that this is just what's going on today. We do an official spring flood outlook. That's going to happen on February 13th. How is that different from tonight? Well, it's 2 more weeks, almost, right? So there's more information. Things will have changed. There'll be new information to show. But also, we do some specialized river forecasting that provides a very direct information about the river. And then we update that the next 2 weeks, so February 27th and March 12th. Our plan is to put that on our website. It's just weather.gov/Omaha. At the top, there'll be a link. So essentially what you saw tonight, and then updated, and with a little more information, and a clearer picture, even from now, as to what is coming in the coming weeks. So that is the current information. That's what we have to show. Again, the big thing is when you walk out the door tonight, to not think, well, it's going to flood for sure. What we know is what we know today, and that information will be updated in the coming weeks. So I encourage you to seek that out.